Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's Richard Lannon for Set for Success. And if you've been paying attention, this is where we discuss what you need to do to be successful in your business, your career, or your life, and from many, many different perspectives. So I have something I have to admit to you, a confession of sorts. I'm a recovering tech head. Yep, over 12 years now. And I used to actually run a large region for one of the big 5 consulting firms. And even one of my friends used to call me actually a closet nerd. That might be true. My youngest son reminds me, though, that the nerds have taken over the world. Just think about Microsoft and Apple and Facebook and Dropbox and Google. Dad, he says, you see, we're now in charge. Well, I guess even the parents today are smart enough to know that they have to be fueling and supporting their kids' technology adventures. Heck, my youngest son's ambition is to work for Google someday, or on another day, be a games programmer. You see, he is a teenager, so his aspirations change day by day. So what does it mean, or what does this have to do with Tech Head's confession? Well, I guess you could say that I have a sweet spot for technology industry and how it impacts business, or how business impacts the technology industry. The technology is a tool that we use to get things done in life and in business, so it's always important to take it into consideration. My interests range from everything from infrastructure to application side of things. And I love how technology and new processes can be innovative or disrupt our business world or our personal worlds, especially if it's for the good of something. Like create new opportunities or new jobs or new career paths, or simply be a strategic enabler for a business so it can be more successful. Whatever the deal with technology, I really have to say that I like what you can do with it. I guess you can say that I'm tech-savvy old guy. Would that be like a TSOG, tech-savvy old guy? Maybe. Well, that is what I would be if I walked into a technology company today and worked for a technology company. I would be the old guy who's coming in with some experience in that space. But I do believe that since 2010, the technology industry has changed a lot. The whole technology world has. It has transitioned year, I guess it was, for the business and for personal ways that we do things and look at technology again. And if you know the history of technology and how we use it, you know that there's sort of periods of time where we go through leaps of transition. I think we've gone through that again. To some degree, what was old is new again, and what was new is now old. There's been a shift on many levels. Some careers died, some new careers have been added. In the technology of things, infrastructure technology has stayed a constant, though. So you'll always have information or infrastructure technology. It stays to the core of the business with a lot, and I guess we have to look at it because there's lots of questions around that. You know, do you buy something? Do you lease it? Do you rent it? Do you own it? Do you borrow it? Or, well, you fill in the blank there. So why have I mentioned this? Well, we're going to chat today with a technology guru, an infrastructure technology guru who I hope I have that correct, Kyle Malotkin. And Kyle will tell you a little bit about himself and his company. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how technology all works and the type of work he's been up to. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, how you doing?
Not too bad yourself.
Not bad, good. Listen, Kyle, let's start off a little bit about your expertise or your past. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
So I'm an infrastructure guy by trade, so that means servers and networking and client services, that kind of stuff. Right now I'm running a managed services company, Informatics Technology Group. We focus on IT outsourcing for small and medium-sized businesses. So we manage all of their servers, their infrastructure. We provide technical support for end users and things of that nature.
Those kind of things. So Kyle, why don't we back up a little bit, okay? So I really like to support listeners in terms of the development of their careers. You know, I think that's one of the important things that we can give back to people in community. How did you get into this? Like, what was the sort of, you know, how did your career unfold? And then we'll talk a bit about how infrastructure and everything works for small to medium-sized businesses. So how did your career unfold?
So like most people in the industry, I started out on the help desk. I was providing technical support for a large internet services provider.
Okay.
So dealing with inbound support calls from people all over the U.S. was where I got started. I still use a lot of the skills that I acquired in that role today, even mostly around de-escalation of people who are upset because when technology is not working, they can become very angry.
Yeah, people are not happy when their toys don't work.
Yeah. Exactly. So just all around managing expectations and de-escalating people who are upset with a situation. So those are skills I still draw on today. From there, moved into a desktop support role, so doing in-person client services. And then from there, moving into more of an infrastructure role, setting up servers, and expanding on the knowledge you gain in these workstation roles, and then onwards and upwards, so to speak.
Okay. And now, have you worked with both big business and small organizations? Like, did your career sort of start with larger type organizations, and you just sort of refined yourself as you went along?
Mostly spent time in smaller or medium-sized firms.
Okay.
I haven't worked for any of the big global national kind of companies or anything like
Or anything
that.
along that lines. What are some of the examples of some of the companies you've worked for?
I was at Pollard Banknote, and I was at a government organization previously. I was at a small consulting firm about 10 years ago. And I was at Converges, was a call center operator where I did my first technical support.
Yeah. Where did you, so maybe what we should do is define what infrastructure technology is first,
Sure.
because I think that then lends itself to a very interesting question. So what is infrastructure technology?
Infrastructure is everything that is in, quote, back office. So when you log in and check your email, there's a mail server somewhere that supports that. When you're browsing the web, there's network infrastructure that supports your traffic getting out of your local office and onto the internet. So there's quite a bit that's going on that the user never sees. And if it's done properly, they should never even really need to know that it exists.
So it should almost be like invisible to them.
Yeah, which makes sometimes the cost justification of IT that much more difficult, because people say, well, I see the computers on the desks and, well, that's all good. But they don't see the other 95% behind the scenes.
I guess you could say infrastructure technology is no different than an infrastructure in a city, like roadways and intersections and yields, and that allow the flow and movement of vehicles or people. Would that
exactly?
a good
Yeah.
analogy?
So sewers and things like that, and unlike the city where everybody's like, fix the roads and let's do infrastructure spending. Sometimes infrastructure spending in an IT sense is more of a tougher sell sometimes. If people don't understand the importance of what it is and why it needs to be maintained and constantly upgraded. And,
Okay.
We just put something in 5 years ago. Well, why is that no longer good? Why
Why
do
is
we
that
need to
no
upgrade
longer-
that mail server?
That happens all the time. I run into that situation. I confess that I'm a bit of a techie geek, right? And I have a number of computers, and it's just like, it's amazing how quickly they go out obsolete. You buy it, and less than 24 months later, even less time than that. But you're looking at, well, maybe I should be buying something else. So it's pretty amazing. You know what we'll do? We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Kyle regarding infrastructure technology, and we'll start to talk a little bit about how it actually in your business, how it'll work for you. This is Richard Lannon. We'll be right back. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And I'm chatting with Kyle Olakin. Just before the break, we were talking about infrastructure technology, and more importantly, we're defining what infrastructure is, and then I sort of equated it to the idea of a city and cars and traffic moving and people, and your mention about the whole idea of infrastructure, and then if you have a pothole in the city, I mean, that's one thing. You see a pothole, fix my pothole. But if you have a pothole, so to speak, in technology, in other words, something's not working, it's often difficult to sort of justify why it's broken and or why you should fix it.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So what you see is people, there might be something that is a critical piece of background infrastructure. So again, running that back office. And it can be difficult to explain why those unseen parts of your overall IT setup need addressing. Why does it need to be upgraded? Why do we need to reinvest? And what we're seeing now as far as trends go is a move away from on-premise infrastructure to cloud infrastructure.
Now, when you say on-premise infrastructure, so let's make sure that we're clear. What is on-premise infrastructure?
So that's physical pieces of equipment, servers, network hardware, that kind of stuff that's on the customer's location. So it's in your office generally. It's owned by the client organization.
Yeah, so they've basically gone out and bought the computers that they need in order to have all that in
Exactly.
place.
So you've bought your servers, you've bought your storage appliances, you've bought your backup appliances, everything like that supports your back office infrastructure. You own it. You can go and look and touch it if you want to.
Yeah, and it's all there. And so there's a trend away from that, which is actually quite humorous, because I know what you're going to see the trend towards is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the past. But what's the trend right right now? Where are things going in terms for the small to medium-sized business owner? I guess for large organizations too, but you deal mostly with small and medium-sized business. Where's the trend
There's a
going
lot more
right
emphasis on cloud infrastructure. So cloud is just a marketing term. It used to be called business process outsourcing. The cloud is really just a computer that somebody else owns in somebody else's building.
Yeah, okay.
And when you have these large cloud providers like Microsoft or Amazon Web Services, they have billions and billions of dollars in globally distributed data centers. And they can offer you the same thing that you can do in your own small server room, but at a cheaper price point. When you talk about you're no longer needing to pay for power to power those systems, pay for air conditioning to keep them cool, pay for hardware refreshes and that kind of stuff. So they can manage things at a broader scale.
Yeah, I guess that's actually really good to put it that way. And I like the idea that you talked about housing it somewhere. Because if you own a business, you have to have, you talk about a riser room or a server room, you have to have that somewhere. And that's square footage. You know, I don't know how big, I mean, it would depend on the size of the organization, I guess. In my day, you'd have these rooms that were actually quite large with these banks of computers in them that you had to maintain and everything.
You're always going to need a riser room or network room for the actual physical connectivity of all your workstations and things that are in your office. But your actual server farms are not going to necessarily need to be in the same building.
Now, we're using some very interesting terms, right? Server farms, because I suspect, I mean, I probably got some people out listening to us right now. They're going, server farms. I run a farm. What are you talking about, right? But maybe we can create a few analogies here. So what is a server farm?
Just basically, a collection of servers filling a single role.
Okay. So I want to go a little bit further with that. A collection of servers, right? So when we talk about servers, we're talking about computers, right? So a collection of computers.
Think of a server as really just a very powerful computer. It's got specialized CPUs. It's got more advanced RAM. It's got a lot more cooling capacity. It's got a lot more storage capacity. So it's not like your desktop computer that you have in your living room. It's a very specialized, very powerful piece of hardware. It runs a very specific application.
And that you're connecting as a business or even individually, I guess, that you're connecting with. Isn't that like one of the tools I mentioned in my monologue coming in was like Dropbox? I mean, pretty much everybody I know now has a Dropbox or some kind of thing like that. And whether for business use or personal use, right? Isn't that what you're tapping into when you have like a Dropbox? You're tapping into like the cloud technology, somebody else's server farm?
Exactly. So Dropbox operates a large storage infrastructure so when you load your photos, your documents into Dropbox, it's actually replicating across from a data center in California to another one in New York, for example. And then there's multiple copies of that. So instead of having a drive on a computer in your house, now you have your information stored in the cloud, which means somebody else's computer elsewhere. And there's some protections around maintaining the physical security of that nobody can just drive in and steal that server.
That actually does pose a very interesting question, because that was where I was going to go with this, is that okay, so we have a choice. You can either house your information at your own business, which is cost, or you can house it somewhere else, which costs. But then there's always security involved. So where's security at right now in terms of the cloud?
It's an emerging area. In a lot of providers, it's very well defined and actually more robust than probably what smaller firms can do on their own, as far as perimeter security, making sure that nobody can just attack that infrastructure and get access to your data. Physical security, certainly, that these data centers are like military installations in some cases with 24/7 security physically on site. So that aspect to it.
What about from the hacking perspective?
Well, that's always a risk. There's a differentiator between if it's on premise, you could still have it hacked. If it's in the cloud, it could still be hacked. When you're a small business and it's on premise, likely you're not going to be hacked via a targeted attack, which means somebody knows about XYZ plumbing shop or whatever and wants to attack them specifically. That's
small.
unlikely.
They're too small.
They could be hacked if somebody's just doing what's called a sweep scan, where they're looking for weaknesses across the internet in general, and you happen to be stumbled across, then they could potentially hack you that way. Versus the other side of the coin is the cloud. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on security infrastructure, but Dropbox has a huge target on it, for example.
Sure.
Everybody's like, well, that's where
let's
they're going to
let's go after
for a
Google.
targeted
Let's
attack.
go after Google or Microsoft or Dropbox or Amazon because they're the big boys, right?
So you counter that off with the fact that there's a large team of security experts there doing vulnerability analysis and watching the network in real time and making sure that if something's going on, they're dealing with it right away.
You know what? I think what we'll do, Kyle, is we'll take a short break. And when we come back, we'll continue the sort of discussion about infrastructure and maybe a little bit more on security, because I suspect security is one of those things that everybody's concerned about. This is Richard Lannon. We'll be right back. Hi, it's Richard Lannon for Set for Success. Having a really interesting conversation today. You know, one of the things I talked about in the opening of the show is being a bit of a techie, geeky type guy. I sort of love technology and what we can do in our lives and on our business. And today we're talking a little bit more about infrastructure technology, all of the nuts and bolts, the things in the back end where you don't always see it, but it's the things that are important to you to make sure that your business or even your personal life for that matter is running well. If you've been listening, you know, some of the areas of concern are, you know, are you owning the technology yourself, or have you placed it out in that nebulous thing called the cloud, which is really a data center that somebody else owns? And what are you doing about security? You know, are you concerned about potentially being hacked? Well, my guest today is Kyle Malakan, and Kyle is basically an infrastructure guru, and he runs his own company, and he's spending some time talking about these issues with us. So if you want to know a little bit more and maybe how you can be set for success in your business with the infrastructure technology that you're looking to have in place, you'll want to continue listening to us. We're going to come right back. We'll also do the Set for Success tips, the things you need to consider doing as it relates to technology in your business from an infrastructure perspective. This is Richard Lannon, and we'll be right back. Hi, it's Richard Lannon, and I'm hanging out with my buddy Kyle, the infrastructure guru. Kyle, what is the name of your company again?
Informatics Technology Group.
Informatics Technology Group. You know, Kyle, just before the break, we were talking about security, because I know security and being hacked, let's face it, I think it's everybody's concern. You know, whether you've got smartphones, you have a tablet, you have a laptop computer or a desktop computer, or what we're talking about, infrastructure and clouds and stuff like this. What are some of the things that maybe we need to start to take into consideration when it comes to security as a small or medium-sized business?
One of the biggest things that you need to worry about is a concept around identity management and the AAA framework.
So first of all, let's back up and ask the obvious question: what's identity management?
Identity management is just keeping a list of your employees and their individual logins. So avoiding the practice of sharing a single login. Let's say you have a time card or payroll application, you just have payroll at companyxyz.com. That would be a poor practice from an identity management standpoint.
Okay.
You should have Richard Lannon at companyxyz.com for your own payroll login or whatever it is, the application that you're using. And this is that getting into that AAA concept. So authentication, authorization, and accounting.
Okay, so let's just make sure I got that right. Authentication, authorization and accounting.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the first A. What's authentication?
So authentication is, you say you're Richard Lannon. What mechanisms do I have to prove that that's who you are? So in the digital world, it'd be username and password, or maybe a token that also authenticates. So that's a physical device you have. It reads some numbers to you.
Now, okay, so let's go to like a bank login. I mean, I suspect that a lot of our listeners have logged into their own bank accounts, whether at machine or at home, right? Or at a bank machine or at home. And sometimes it comes up with, you put in your user name and your ID, and then it comes up and says, answer your security question. Is that an authentication?
That's all a form of authentication. Exactly.
Okay, that's good to actually know. Yeah, it's funny about that. Authentication sounds like it's really important security-wise, but boy, it's a pain sometimes.
Well, it is important. The next thing is authorization.
Okay.
So just because we've proved that you're Richard Lannon, what are you authorized to do
on this account?
Let's think about let's say you come to the security desk here in the building. You say, hey, I'm Richard Lannon. I'm trying to get up to the second floor. Well, first of all, how do they prove that that's you? They might ask for your driver's license. Next thing is, so what, you're Richard Lannon, that's great, but are you allowed to go to the second floor? And then the third part is the accounting, keeping a log and getting you to sign in, for example.
Okay, so that's
in
sort
the
of
computer world, there's an actual digital log that says so-and-so logged into this system at this time and did this action. which coming back to identity management, if you have a shared login and somebody logs into your system and deletes a bunch of things, you go back to the logs, it just says generic user did all these things. Well, so that's useless because you can't prove who did what. So that's why you need to avoid sharing logins across different employees and making sure that everybody has their own permissions to things.
So I guess it's sort of like that. We use the email ID as the example, right? Info at imacompany.com,
Mm-hmm.
right? And anybody can probably, maybe multiple people access that account for monitoring purposes or whatever, but the better way to do it would be actually have individual accounts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to log in.
And if you have a proper business class mail system, then if you need info at imacompany.com, you can do what's called a distribution list. So if somebody emails that address, it can go to 3 people, but those 3 people have their own separate logins, so you can track and monitor what they're doing if ever it becomes necessary to do that.
And I guess that would be really good in terms of a support situation where maybe you're running your own support customer services or whatever. You want to make sure that people have their own different identifications, so you know what they're doing.
When it comes to like smaller firms being compromised, it's generally a lack of best practices around identity management and sharing of passwords and single logins and things. Just sloppy work in that sense.
Okay.
That's where most of the problems are coming from.
So what are some of the best practices that they could engage in? Because we've already hit a few things in terms of infrastructure, owning your system or in a cloud, and then the actual security of that system. So what are some of the things that
one of the biggest things, like if you buy a piece of equipment, make sure it's properly configured. Don't use the default passwords on things, because if I find out you're running system XYZ, it's a quick Google search to find out what the default login is for that. And if that system is exposed to the internet, now you have a real problem. Because anybody somebody who's 12 years old can probably get into that system without too much difficulty.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how people do that. And also, don't put your passwords and everything under your desk drawer, taped to the bottom, because people know to look there.
Yeah, I'd be, at least then it's hidden. A lot of times you see it's right on the front of the monitor.
Little sticky on the front of the monitor. Yeah, yeah. I'm just leaving that for the IT person to do their updates for me.
Just a quick note on just personal stuff. Like, never will your bank email you and say, please reset your password or anything like that. That's always a scam. No matter how legitimate the email looks, the bank never needs to know your login information.
Yeah. You get stuff like that from PayPal, actually even from Canada Revenue Agency. I've had
That's a big one in the spring, tax time.
Tax time, you get emails from them saying your taxes are due and you owe X number of money, but go in and set up your account. Canada Revenue Agency, as far as I know, does not do that.
Never.
And I know one time I actually phoned them up and said, listen, I just received this email. I just want to make sure you're aware of it. And we talked about it a bit and stuff. And so I try to report that stuff, but usually they know, those kind of things. What are some of the other best practices? Well, you know what? Here's a better way to go maybe. And you tell me. During the break, we were talking a little bit about the difference between owning and leasing and that. So maybe that's a spot that we could sort of slide in temporarily to. Like, what are some of the options? Why would you consider owning versus leasing or renting space? What are some of the options now?
Mostly a financial decision. So big CapEx or capital expenditure versus an operating cost. So if you're going to buy something up front, then maybe you capitalize it over 3-5 years, whatever your finance people want you to do. Or you can lease things and turn it into a pure operating expense. So
it's money in, money out.
Yeah,
so
you could actually do a lease on the hardware, and then it's still owned by you. It's on-premise infrastructure. Another option now with the cloud is just paying a rent almost to use that infrastructure. A lot of cloud providers do things almost similar to the way your hydrometer works. So you just pay for the amount of resources that you use. It's not a fixed price per month. It's all on consumption based. Yeah,
and a lot of people can use the cloud now too. I know, for example, I use a cloud for backup services. Mm-hmm. I used to buy all my own infrastructure for backup and stuff. I don't do that anymore. It's now done automatically, and I get a log of it, and I know where it's there. And periodically, we do periodic checks, so that works out quite well. And it's fairly inexpensive. I was amazed.
So there's a couple of different ways you do the financial analysis. That the cloud is generally going to be cheaper for you. But if you're not spending any money now and you look at the cloud, you're like, well, how come that's more expensive? But you've missed the fact that you have a bunch of risk that you're not addressing, and that you could lose all your information if your on-premise infrastructure
So
fails.
I'll tell you what we should do is take a short break, and maybe we'll come back and talk about that.
Sure.
It's Richard Lannon. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. It's Richard Lannon, and we're chatting with Kyle Manlocken today, and we're talking about computer infrastructure. And just before the break, we were talking about the importance of backups. Wasn't that, Kyle? That's what we were talking about. And then during the break, we were just dialoguing a little bit more about that. So what are, I guess, was it a best practice around backups? Was where we were going with that?
Yeah. So there's got a rule called the 3-2-1 rule. So
the 3-2-1 rule. So we got another rule. We did the AAA, and now we're into the 3-2-1.
IT's always about rules, Richard.
And it's always about three things too, right? Every acronym, everything's like three, right? Okay, so what's the 3-2-1 rule?
So the 3-2-1 rule says that you should have at least 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types, and at least one of them off-site.
Okay, so 3-2-1 rule.
Exactly.
It's funny, I don't remember that rule, and I worked infrastructure. I managed a whole large organization. But you know what? When I look back, we did that.
So if you have a file server and your only backup is a USB flash drive that you sometimes take home with you, you're not in compliance with the 3-2-1 rule.
3-2-1 rule. Okay, so 3 copies of your data. So could that 3 copies be a copy on your computer, a copy on
a network storage device of some kind, or
either
tape?
Either internally or externally to you, right? So either in the cloud or
so at least one copy's off-site somewhere. So if you're running a multi-office environment, then you could send a copy of your backup to a different office that's physically separated, or you send it to the cloud, or you send it to the owner's house, whatever it needs to be, as long as it's off-site.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what type of company you have too, right? I mean, we're talking more small and medium business where the owner, the CEO, might be somebody who actually grew the company, right? And they're looking at, they might have 50 employees or 100 employees.
So when you're designing what's called like business continuity programs, is really the fancy term for all this.
Okay.
Is you really take a worst case scenario approach to looking at your business risk, and then work backwards from there.
Okay.
So what happens if your entire office blows up because of a natural gas leak?
Okay, fair
and you're
enough.
like, oh, I've lost everything. Well, there's your first thing to do, right? If you said, well, I just get some new equipment and then go to my offsite backups and I'm back up and running, well, then you've addressed that challenge. Then you step back to what happens if a sprinkler system goes off in your computer room and ruins your local copier. Then what do you do? So you kind of work backwards from a worst case scenario approach, and then you develop answers to all of those things. And those answers are always technical solutions to whether you're doing backup, sending it off-site, how do you get it back? Do you have a different set of servers at your secondary location, and you're actually doing a replication? So that would be a hot or a warm site, which means if site number 1 goes down, you just turn on site number 2 and your business is back up and running. And that all comes back to the needs of that particular company. If you're a 24/7 operation, you've got thousands of customers, then you probably want to look at something like a hot or a warm site. If you could afford to be down for a day or 2 while you get things back in place, then maybe you don't need to spend that kind of money on that type of backup and business resiliency stuff. But a lot of times there's never a good answer to say, well, our building it blew up and we've lost everything.
Well, you don't know what's going to happen, right?
So you always got to answer for that.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really about what's the worst case scenario. I guess what's the least worst case scenario, and then what can you live with? Maybe that's sort of a way to put it in business wise, and and then what is the chance of some of those things happening?
So that's called risk management. There's guys who get paid a lot more than I do to do that. But certainly we can help with some of the broad strokes of business risk avoidance. And taking a worst case scenario approach to things. Let's say you lost a bunch of infrastructure. Generally, that's going to be an insurance claim of some kind. So really, we're just protecting the data at that point.
And the data is what's really valuable.
That's correct.
Technology itself depreciates at a rapid rate, and it's really the data is what keeps you up and running.
So it's all about designing what's called a response strategy. So if an event happens, whatever you define that event to be, how do you respond to that? So if it's a matter of getting some new server infrastructure in place and then just restoring your offsite backups, that could get you back up and running.
So that's a really good tip. The 3-2-1 is a really good set for success type tip in terms of your business for infrastructure and for securing or receiving your data.
So 3 copies of your data, at least 2 different media types, and one of them offsite.
One of the other things we were chatting about during the break was about technology being a strategic enabler. And I know from my days in the field, we talked about that a lot. In what way is technology a strategic enabler these days?
Well, it enables what's called business intelligence. And that sounds kind of like something that maybe people would make some jokes about perhaps, but business intelligence is all around leveraging the existing information that your company already has and looking at it in an analytical way. So if you've put in new infrastructure and new systems that allows you to collect more data points on what your customers are buying and at what times and how and that kind of stuff, then you can do business analytics and look at the business intelligence side of that information, so it helps you make better business decisions. You see a lot of this when you maybe go to a retail store and they ask you for your postal code. What they're really doing is gathering information on the different regions that customers are coming from, so that helps them determine where they might locate their next store, for example.
Yeah, or their promotion. I worked in direct marketing for a while, and we'd use that kind of stuff to understand the geography of our customers, you know, and then we work with demographics and psychographics and stuff, and we collect as much data as we could.
Well, the big trend now is the points cards, right? If you can get your people to scan your points card, Safeway was big for this with their Safeway card. Now they have a portfolio of information on who's buying what and at what times, and they can make better product selection decisions by using
at their locations
exactly.
and stuff. So that makes a lot of sense too, and that's a good way of using information technology as strategic enabler.
So your questions about being able to, like, if you put these systems in place, you can get the leg up on your competition by better understanding your customers and better understanding your marketplace. Yeah.
So there's another one for you too, Kyle. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
They can go to our website, informanics.com, informanix.com, or call us at 204-289-3045.
Yeah, there's a lot in the infrastructure space today. I think years ago it was just really almost like just screwdrivers and wires, but it's really has branched out into a whole business area that can really help an organization grow.
That's correct.
Yeah. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, there's people, there's always 3 types of people in the world, I guess, from my perspective. There's people who think technology is evil, and then there's people who recognize that technology is still an expense, but you kind of got to do it. And then there's that third person who sees the value in technology and wants to do things right, wants to make strategic investments in technology to help their own company to get better.
Fair enough. You know what? Maybe some of our listeners are following one of those 3 categories today, and hopefully the latter one would be really nice. This is Richard Lannon. You've been listening to Set for Success, and we're going to take a short break. Hi, it's Richard Lannon for Set for Success, and what a show we've been having. I've learned more about infrastructure technology than I've really have learned in a while. I know some of this stuff, but that Kyle's been sharing, but it's just amazing. Now, my guest has been Kyle Malakan, and Kyle is from Informanics.
Informatics Technology Group.
Informatics Technology. Kyle, if you had one final thought for our listeners, what would it be?
Backups. Follow that 3-2-1 rule. So 3 copies of your data, 2 different media types, and at least 1 offsite. This is where companies go out of business. Yeah, it's funny you would say that. I told you that I use a cloud backup service. I love it, right? And at first, when I first started, but now I can be anywhere. If my computer fails and I'm in the UK, doesn't matter, right? I can go and get myself a new laptop and load it up, and I'm ready to go. It's also not enough to just do the backups. You also need to be testing them regularly. You don't want to have an emergency situation and then find out that all the stuff you thought was there is not working properly.
Yeah, good plan. You know what? You're listening to Richard Lannon for Set for Success, and I want to thank my guest, Kyle. I love it when you come on the show. This is your second time with me. Before, we talked about something completely different. Listen, if you have any points or anything, or you got a note for me, just send it to richard@setforsuccess.ca. Maybe there's a guest or a topic you'd like me to have for the show. Just richard@setforsuccess.ca. Of course, I'd like to thank my listeners for tuning in. And as always, do your best, invest in the success of others, and make your journey count.